mission of AARP. I think you will know, once you hear the end of this program, you will be both impressed and inspired, as I am, to see the work that has been done, and not only the kinds of things that have been done, but also who's been doing it. And in many cases, we have folks who had never really done much work in the way. In fact, some folks had never even been to the State House before. And now you'll hear some amazing contributions that they have made, one and all. So I do want to just say that we're going to begin with our top volunteer, Jim Campbell. He's the state president of AARP, and just a few opening comments from Jim. Who will be off of mute in just a moment.
It works better off of mute. Yeah, you're right there.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. This is an honor for me to be here this morning. As a former legislator, I remember in the early days when I was still in the House of Delegates that they judged lobbying by how much money the lobbyists made. The ones that made the more higher salaries were the most effective lobbyists. And that's changed. And Hank and Tammy came on the scene and changed the model, I think, to make it much more volunteer oriented. It's just amazing to me that now some of the major businesses, organizations, lobbyists, legislators come to AARP for advice on bills and legislation. And they really, and it's the other amazing thing, it's a number of volunteers we have and their expertise. I mean, they are skilled in experts in a number of areas, from technology to healthcare to social issues. So it's just been an honor to be part of this team and see the progress we made. So I wanted to thank Tammy and Hank for developing this model, which I hope can work in other states too, but it's just worked really well for us. And I was looking at this 7 pages of bills that we had passed, and I got through about 5 of them, so 5 pages so far. So just amazing. This is a volunteer effort, and you know how much our volunteers are paid. So this is just a great contribution. I also want to acknowledge too that this year helped a lot that we had a new governor who was very sympathetic to a lot of our issues. So things are moving. I was going to end with a corny song by the Carpenters called "We Only Just Begun," but I was thinking that's a little too corny. So I'll go back to you guys and thank you for all you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and appreciate your leadership all along the way that we've been able to do these kinds of things. And just let me just say that as I introduce our Senior Associate State Director for Advocacy, Tammy Bresnahan, I want to emphasize the fact that she's not only an outstanding advocate for AARP, but she's also an outstanding teacher. And that comes to mind given the fact that our founder was a teacher. And I'm just so proud of the work that they have done and what she has been able to accomplish, along with the many volunteers that we have. And although this is a commercial-free hour, let me assure you of that, I am going to make one little exception to that. And the exception is, if you are interested in joining this team, this advocacy team, feel free to make an application to this office, and we will get back to you, and we'll see if this is a good fit and make that happen. With that, let me just turn it over to our Senior Associate State Director, Tammy Bresnahan.
Thank you, Hank, and thank you all for tuning in today. This is about the volunteers, our volunteers who have worked on legislation. This is our first and hopefully annual legislative briefing for our members, volunteers, and staff. AARP takes pride in being a wise friend and a fierce defender for its members and all older Americans and Marylanders. As you know, the Maryland General Assembly is a session from the second Wednesday in January until the second Monday in April. Exactly 90 days. This year marked the 445th legislative session of the Maryland General Assembly. And I bet everyone here would agree that's a really old body. Over the 90 days of the legislative session, dozens, and I mean dozens, of AARP Maryland volunteers reviewed hundreds of bills, from expanding high-speed internet to lobbying for funding for behavioral health services. And you're going to meet a few of those volunteers who have coordinated our activity, tracked our legislation, drafted testimony, met with legislators, walk the halls of Annapolis, who've done it all. They are here to talk about some of the issues that they worked on. And normally we have this meeting on Fridays and they run this meeting. We're giving them a break. We want to highlight their work. We want to show you what they do. In addition, we will just talk a little bit about, and I'll probably talk about what's happening in the long-term care area. But like Hank said, if you are interested in working with AARP Maryland, please go to aarp.org/MD. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our Executive Council member and lead legislative advocate, Karen Calla. She will introduce herself, talk about some of the things that she does during the legislative session, and some of the bills that she's worked on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. And thank you all for being here today. It's really an honor and a privilege, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share what we do, not only throughout the session, but throughout the year in working together. I started as a volunteer in the winter of 2018 as a volunteer legislative aide with Tammy, and she had established this fabulous group of volunteers, and during the session on Fridays, brought volunteers in from all across the state to meet with their specific county delegations. All county delegations meet Fridays during the session in the morning, and people would come in, Tammy would have breakfast for them, everybody would go to their delegation meetings, come back, share what they learned, and sometimes they would stay and they would visit with their delegates and their senators to talk about the issues that were top on AARP priorities. It was a wonderful opportunity. It just kept people together in a wonderful way. We created a database of all of the people that were interested in doing this. And over the years, the database has grown to about, when I send out a mailing, an email, it goes to about 85 people. And when COVID hit, we had to sort of readjust as to what we were going to do to keep everybody together because we couldn't be in person. So we started having regular Zoom meetings, and during the session, it would be every Friday. And then throughout the year, we would still have our Zoom meetings, maybe not as frequent, but we would invite legislators to come and join the meetings so that the legislators could learn about AARP Maryland's priorities, and we could establish our relationship and sort of say, how can we work together on these particular bills? So that was just a wonderful opportunity to keep everybody together. During these Zoom meetings, we not only talk about legislation, but what the different chapters and individuals are doing in their communities. And they are extremely active in lots of different ways. And so that has really helped keep us together. Then when we got to be back in person, we still continued these Zoom meetings because they were so popular, and it really enabled more people to be involved than when we were just in person. So it's been a really fabulous model for keeping people engaged. So what do? During the session, I get up in the morning, I look at the Maryland General Assembly website, and in the House and in the Senate, over the course of the session, there are thousands of bills that are introduced. So we scan through the bills in the morning, pass them on to Tammy. Here are ones that we think fit with AARP priorities. She then goes through them, has to determine if they do meet the priorities, and then which of the volunteers, and as Tammy said, many, many volunteers have just amazing expertise, and you're going to hear from a few of them today. And so those who have expertise in these particular areas, they'll work on the testimony, then they pass it over to Tammy to look at it, they submit it, they come testify in person, and then they follow the bills, they establish those relationships with the legislators who are leading them. So there's so much more to say, but I think this has just been a model that has really worked well for us over the past 5 years, and we're very happy to share it. We did follow close to 130, 150 bills this session, and we're going to talk about just a very few of them. A few that I followed, one of them was House Bill 497, Senate Bill 498, and it talked about taking a rural health collaborative pilot project that was in the Midshore region of Maryland. For those who are not familiar with the Midshore region of Maryland, it's a very rural area, and the health services are just not there for a lot of people. And this bill took the pilot project and made it a permanent collaborative that is funded in the budget by the governor. And it will allow a greater growth of services and facilities to develop. They'll work with Medicare to make sure that people have access, they have the funding they need to get the services that they need. Another bill was in child, it was SB 243, Senate Bill 243, and it's an income tax credit for child independent care. And as many of you know, that so many people provide care, unpaid care, to a child or to an elder person that lives in their home. Now, this bill required that in order to get the credit, the person had to live with you in your home for at least 6 months. And it's a sliding credit on your income tax that you can claim for the care that you provide. And as always, Tammy can always fill in greater details. But then there was one bill that we worked on, and I'll be brief, that didn't pass. That's really, really important for Maryland. We're going to continue to work on this. And it was House Bill 274, Senate Bill 387. And it was a task force to look at reducing the wait times in the emergency department. And we know that this is a critical issue across the board. Maryland has one of the longest wait times. And there was a wonderful group of people who worked really hard just to get a task force to look at this and to bring together the Secretary of Health and members from the House and the Senate and the Maryland Hospital Association and patient advocacy organizations and the emergency department medical staff, just to look at this and see what we can do. It didn't pass. It met some opposition from the hospitals who wanted to be more involved and really broaden it to look at a larger range of issues. So there will be, the bill didn't pass, there will be a group that gets together, but we're going to really keep trying to push on this. But as I said, there were so many bills. It was an incredibly successful session, and we're really looking forward to working with the new administration and with our wonderful volunteers.
I think we're going to turn the spotlight onto our phenomenal and very knowledgeable Jim Gutman. Jim works on everything prescription drugs. And so Jim, please tell our listeners and our audience members what you did as far as the bills that you worked on this session.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. This was a good year and an important year on prescription drug related legislation. Just a little bit of background. Maryland is the first state in the nation to have a prescription drug affordability board, a board with some power to actually reduce prescription drug costs. Other states are looking at it. Several states have adopted it since then. But there were two specific kinds of issues that we needed to deal with in the legislature this year to make sure that the board can do what it needs to do. One of that was the original legislation had some sunset dates, and for those unfamiliar with that terminology, it means basically that the provisions involved would go out of existence at a certain date unless there was action taken. So we had to take action to make sure that sunset did not stop the board from doing things. There were some complications earlier in the board's tenure, and that is funding was vetoed. So there were a lot of funding issues that also needed to be taken care of. And what a big piece of legislation this session, SB 202, House Bill 279 did is a number of things. First of all, it assured the continued existence and authority of the board. And it also assured its ability to do what's going to be its first major action, which is imposing what is called upper payment limits. And that means that both state and local government entities, and those are the ones initially covered by the board, will be able to say, we will not pay more than this amount. And since the Maryland is a big market, the expectation among everybody is that that's going to happen, that the pharmaceutical companies will say, okay, we'll take that amount. And this will have implications not only for prices in Maryland, but as this model becomes to be seen as effective also in other states. Separately, there was a piece of legislation that gave the board another $1 million to basically do what it needs to do. The board has been operating pretty much on a shoestring, borrowing money from the Maryland Healthcare Commission, and this will assure that it can go on its own, have its own staff, which it has staffed up for, and do the things that it needs to do. So those things were real important. I'm delighted that we were able to get those through, and we go from here, and hopefully you start to see with upper payment limits by the end of this year, and eventually getting extended to the general population. Tammy, I'm sure I left something out, so if there's anything else I should cover, let me know.
Thanks, Jim. I guess I'll take it from here, since you've done all you can do about health for sure, and your work has been phenomenal in this area. So thank you. So I guess it's my turn now. My name is Karen Morgan. I'm a member of the Executive Council. I've been working full-time with AARP, volunteering full-time with AARP Maryland for about 3 years or so. And before I did that, I worked as an attorney for the Maryland legislature. And one of the areas that I really cared about a lot had to do with computer security and identity theft and economic crimes. So I'm hoping to bring that expertise to AARP Maryland. And that's where my interest in bills related to privacy and things about keeping people safe when they are online, that's where my interest comes from. And I really care about that sort of thing. I even watch movies about it, so there you go. So the bills that I worked on, one of them was Senate Bill 90, also House Bill 37. And this is called the Stop the Spam Calls Act of 2023. It was one of the most popular bills in the legislature, amazingly. People were dying, were asking to be sponsors to this bill, because who's against spam unless you're a spammer? So what this bill does is it's not going to really stop all the spam, but it does shoot a warning across the bow to spammers who want to annoy people, Maryland residents, with their unceasing calls. So what the bill does is it sets up restrictions on how telephone solicitations can be made unless you've given prior express written consent to have that interaction. But if you haven't done that, then companies that use robocalls, automated messages, or that try to disguise their number or disguise who is talking to the caller, those companies are restricted from doing that. And again, this applies to all Maryland residents. The bill also, or the law also restricts what times businesses can call people. So they're limited to calling between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., but after that, they can't keep calling you. And the bill also limits how many times in a 24-hour period they can call you about a specific subject. The bill does not take effect until January 1st, 2024, but at that point in time, we're hoping that it will make a difference in your ability to actually talk on the phone without spammers interrupting you. The bill does create some exemptions for educational organizations, charitable, political organizations. That may be good or bad news depending on where you fall, but in spite of those exceptions, it is hoped that this bill will create a real speed bump in terms of spammers trying to contact Maryland residents without their consent. And again, it goes into effect January 1st, 2024, that's Senate Bill 90 or House Bill 37. Another bill that I worked on became law is Senate Bill 797. It's also House Bill 1191. And this bill creates the task force on preventing and countering elder abuse. So the idea behind this task force is that elder abuse creates a lot of interconnecting, wide-ranging problems. It's rarely just one thing. So if a person who is victimized by this type of abuse is getting, physical abuse or is being neglected, they're also likely to be suffering financial abuse, or they might be suffering sexual abuse, or maybe their benefits are being trafficked. There are all kinds of things that sort of converge to create just, a horrible situation for people who are victimized by these types of crimes. The other issue is that we don't know that much about the extent of these crimes because they're often unreported. When people who experience this abuse end up feeling ashamed, they don't talk about it, especially if the abuse is being perpetrated by a family member. So there's a whole lot that we don't know, and hopefully this task force is going to lift the cover on how prevalent this horrible crime is. By the time we get to 2030, the number of Marylanders 65 and older is expected to double. So elder abuse is not just a problem of people who are 65 today. It could be a problem in 2030 as people become 65, as more and more people become 65 and older. And the fastest growing population in Maryland are people ages 80 and over. We're expected to live longer. So we really need to find a way to address this issue. So this task force will consist of around 20 people from different areas of expertise: law enforcement, social advocacy, the financial area, as well as legislators, the Secretary of Aging, Chief Medical Examiner. There are a number of different types of people who are going to be on this task force. The task force will last 2 years, and it will go into effect July 1st of 2023, and it will expire in 2025. But by the time that expiration date comes up, there will be a preliminary report that needs to go to the governor and members of the General Assembly about what the task force is finding. And by a year later, December of 2024, the final report of the task force will be issued. AARP Maryland intends to monitor what is going on with this task force because, of course, we're interested. We supported this bill. We were proud to support this bill. And we really hope that we can find out more about what elder abuse really means for Maryland citizens and what kinds of things, what kinds of specific steps we can take, new laws, new policies, whatever, to address this horrible crime. So, those are the bills some of the bills that I helped to work on. And in terms of what we think is going to happen next year, we expect to see more bills related to privacy and maybe computer security. But one thing that we're finding out is that privacy is complicated. So when we have bills that establish some real barriers to privacy intrusion, there's always somebody on the other side who says, well, that's stopping me from continuing my business, or that's stopping me from reaching people that I need to reach, or to finding out about things about my family. It's complicated. So we're going to be tracking those bills and looking for ways to ensure that Marylanders keep their privacy where they need to have privacy, but also get the information that they need when they need to get that information. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Tammy.
No,
Thank you.
before we pass the baton to Priscilla, I just want to make sure that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we have someone monitoring the chat, and we'll be happy after Priscilla makes her presentation, or I'm just going to come back to me and I'll talk about a couple of the bills in long-term care. But we'd like to hear from you. If you have questions, we'll answer them to the best of our ability. If we can't, we'll get back to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Priscilla. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. I'm Priscilla Cania. I've been volunteering with AARP for about 5 years. And before I talk about my pieces, I do have a question. So Karen, on the spam calls, I, like many other people who have moved into Maryland, have an area code that's not 410. Will the spam calls be protected by area code or is it by residence?
They're generally protected by area code, but the presumption that's established in the bill is that the call reaches you and you're in Maryland, that you're a Maryland resident. So if it's a robocall, you should have given prior express written consent before that call reached you. If you didn't do that, then the originator of that call should not be reaching out to you.
So they'll know that I'm in Maryland.
They should make it their business to find out who they're calling before they make the call.
All right,
That's the idea.
Yeah, I hope that works. Yeah.
I do too.
It's a great bill, Karen. All right, today I'm going to focus on some bills that relate to AARP's livable communities. The first one is House Bill 239, Senate Bill 382. It's called Accessory Dwelling Units Promotion and Policy Task Force. So an accessory dwelling unit is a self-contained residential unit located on a property that has a main single-family home. It can be a separate detached unit or it can be created in the home, such as a walk-in garage or walk-in basement or a garage. These units are ideal for caregivers, family members, or rentals so that people can afford to stay in their home when their income is more limited and the cost of living there is increased. The state bill will create a task force to study the feasibility of state legislation permitting ADUs, looking at the need and what legislation is currently in force. AARP will be represented on the task force. The Anne Arundel County Council recently passed Bill 623, which allows ADUs in Anne Arundel County, exempting them from capital facility connection charges and impact fees. A few years ago, Annapolis passed a similar bill, and many other counties and municipalities have passed these bills. Last year, they tried to pass an ADU bill in the state, just allowing ADUs, and that did not go anywhere. So this task force will look at trying to come up with some legislation for the 2025 session. It's going to be 2 years worth of work on the task force. Now, HB 70 was a delicate Charcutian bill called Safe Access for All Roads Act of 2023, or SAFE, S-A-F-E. Let me tell you, as I sat at the table to testify for this bill, I listened to testimony that was just heartbreaking. One person spent their entire 2 minutes reading the names of people who were killed while walking or biking in one local area. Another man told the story of his wife was a military hero all over the world, working for the military, and she died when her bike was struck here in Maryland. Our own Tammy Bresnahan's brother was killed on a street in Pasadena. So this is near and dear to us. This bill won't prevent deaths of pedestrians or all deaths of pedestrians, but it is a step forward. It requires MDOT to implement all possible incremental and near-term safety improvements as soon as practicable when a new approved pedestrian or bicycle safety construction or improvement project is projected to take more than 12 months to complete. So just remember, slow down for pedestrians and bikers. So now I guess we're ready to hear some questions and thoughts from you. And please remember to support our livable communities legislation. And I'm going to turn it back to Tammy.
Hi again. I'm going to just talk about a couple of bills that you might find of interest. The first one is House Bill 707, Senate Bill 660. We worked with the Office of the Comptroller, the new Comptroller, Brooke Lehrman, and this establishes a taxpayer advocate division within the Comptroller's office. And this should help you navigate if you are owed a return or you have unpaid taxes or anything that has to do with paying your Maryland taxes. You will now have an advocate in the Comptroller's office. So we were pleased to support that. I'd also like to bring to your attention another bill that we worked on in the long-term care space. That's House Bill 774, Senate Bill 665. It's called Assisted Living Programs, Unlicensed Programs, Resident Abuse, Exploitation and Neglect, the Senator Dolores Kelly Residents of Unlicensed Program Protection Act of 2023. And Senator Kelly was a big advocate for assisted living, folks living in assisted living. And this bill, believe it or not, was needed because if there was an unlicensed assisted living in your community, say in Baltimore City or in Howard County, the only thing that the Department of Health could do was to send them a letter telling them to get licensed. This bill allows the Office of Healthcare Quality to now, if there is an allegation of abuse and neglect, to go in, investigate, and then if they find abuse and neglect, to turn that over to the Attorney General's office. We were very pleased to work with the Office of the Attorney General on this bill because we know that there are people that are desperate for care of their elders, their loved ones, their moms, their dads, their grandparents, and sometimes they go into these facilities unbeknownst to them that they're not licensed. So we're very thrilled to have been a partner in that with the Attorney General's office. And one final bill that we worked on in the long-term care space is House Bill 614, Senate Bill 228, the Department of Aging, Long-Term Care and Dementia Care Navigation Programs. Requires the local area Office on Aging to develop a long-term care and dementia care navigation program for the community. And so now you'll have help with the services and resources out there. If you have a loved one, or if you need long-term care services, or if you need dementia care services, the local Office on Aging will help you do that. So again, if you have any questions or you have any comments, please put them in the chat and we'd be happy to answer those questions if we can.
All right, so we have two questions in the chat. First one from Barbara. She wants to know, this question is addressed to Karen. How is the spam bill different from the federal DNC list? What are the consequences for the spammers and how easy or difficult is the reporting protocol for the called person?
Yikes.
Great question.
Three questions.
Those are great questions, Barbara, and apparently somebody's been reading the bill. Okay, give me the first question again, Eleanor. The first part of the question.
How is the spam bill different
From the do not call
federal
list?
DNC? Yep.
Yes, federal DNC, for those who don't know, is the do not call list. So here's a major difference. The do not call list is something that we need to sign up for, and it has national implications. This bill relates to Maryland residents, and it's not about businesses signing up or consenting to be on a list or anything like that. It applies to all businesses that do not have a previous relationship with the caller, and especially those businesses that are using robocalls or voice disguising software or whatever to reach that caller without that caller's prior written express consent. So that's the big difference, is that this is not about signing up. It's not voluntary. It applies to businesses who are engaging with residents in the state of Maryland.
The second question, what are some of the consequences for the spammers?
Okay, well, a business that is doing this illegally would be guilty of what we call an unfair, deceptive, or abusive trade practice. It's the Office of the Attorney General that is responsible for enforcing those provisions. There are criminal penalties that generally about a year in jail. Usually criminal penalties aren't assessed, but businesses can definitely be subject to civil penalties. The Office of the Attorney General is given the authority to sue these businesses in court and to ask for the imposition of fines. Also, cease and desist orders can be issued, that sort of thing. So those are some of the consequences. And believe me, businesses do not want to be charged with an unfair, abusive, or deceptive trade practice. It's a very serious charge, and it doesn't look good on your Facebook profile. So, what was the last part of that question, Eleanor?
How easy or difficult is the reporting protocol for the called person?
I think that's to be determined, to be perfectly honest. If you get a call that is not authorized, that would be something that you'd want to report to the Office of Attorney General, since they're responsible for enforcement. That would be my first stop. Exactly how the office will initiate enforcement in this area has yet to be determined, because the bill just got passed and that needs to be worked out. And there may or may not be regulations that need to be issued to further implement this bill as well.
And one question on the elder care bill. I'm going to speak about the elder care bill. There will be, the question is, will there be assistance to the families with finding affordable licensed care and to the unlicensed facility to get licensed?
So currently, there has been this attempt to try and get unlicensed assisted living licensed. And so what the Office of Healthcare Quality through the Department of Health tries to do is to work with that individual to get them licensed, so that you don't find 5 or 6 people on the street. So it's always the Office of Healthcare Quality, their primary goal to get someone licensed. As far as affordable, that's an issue that we've been tackling on a number of fronts. It's a front that our national office has been tackling as far as affordable health care. It is an issue. Believe it or not, Karen was mentioning the fastest growing population in Maryland, but we do know this little bit of statistic that there are more people over the age of 65 in Maryland than there are children in public school. And so we know what the budget for public school is, and we know what the cost of long-term care is. So we do have to have a meeting of the minds to make sure that we keep raising the issue that people need affordable long-term care, and to make sure, on the other hand, that people do everything that they can to, prepare for retirement. And that's the other, that's what AARP is known for, is making sure that people, that's why we've tried to reach out to people in their 50s, in their 40s, in their 30s, and even in their 20s. It's never too late. And so this is an issue that we will all work on collectively.
And that concludes the questions. Linda Bright from Chapter AARP Suitland Chapter 939 says hello, and thank you for hosting today's legislative briefing.
Thank you. I think Karen wanted to make a few comments.
Actually, I had a question for Priscilla.
Okay.
Yes.
Touche.
Yes. Well, actually, I'm interested in the accessory dwelling units legislation. Why is there so much pushback about giving people or letting people use their garages or other things on their property to make living arrangements for other people? What is the problem with that?
I think there are several, and I can't give you all of them, but I can tell you some that I've heard. One is parking. People say, well, there's not enough parking for extra people to live in. One of the big fears is that when people add these accessory dwelling units, they might use them for short-term Airbnb rentals or something, and they don't want people coming and going and coming and going. They're afraid that people will move out of their house and now have 2 rental properties in one location. There are just lots of different concerns. Another one is on the usage of water and sewerage. So if people have wells and they have their, I don't say sewers, what do you call the septic systems? It adds extra pressure to that.
Oh.
But the reality is that, the counterbalance is that as people age and the property taxes go up and, it just becomes more, and utilities, I mean, we all know that the gas bills have been outrageous lately. You can't afford to live in your own house. So you need often to have somebody come in and rent part of your house to share the expenses, or you know, as you become disabled, and this is my plan, honestly, when I get old, I intend to have one of my family members come and live with me. And, you know, I'm sure she would like her own unit within my house, but then she can caretake me and then I can stay in my own house and live in place. And most people as they age want to age in place. So how do you afford to age in place? And accessory dwelling units gives us the opportunity to age in place.
Right.
So we'll see what happens over time. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting, I'll just mention, ironically, the founder of AARP, Ethel Percy Andrus, found one of her teacher colleagues living in a chicken coop because that person could no longer afford to live in her house. So that's why, you know, these kinds of issues are so important.
Well, I'll make one more comment. When I was growing up in Connecticut, it was a very common practice. You know, people had single family homes that they changed into duplexes. My own grandparents had an old farmhouse. It was lovely, but they couldn't age in place alone. And they took the upstairs unit and made it into an apartment for my aunt. This was common practice. But now we have all these zoning requirements and we have all these restrictions, limitations on what people can do with their homes. So that's why we need to have laws protecting people's ability to do this.
Interesting. Thank you, Priscilla.
So thank you to our panel. And I just want you to know, I mean, this is just a couple of bills that we worked on that we thought that you might be interested in. We also worked on and prepared testimony for other bills, like Karen mentioned, the wait times in emergency rooms. But we worked on a bill with Senator Hershey that would reduce retirement income tax. We worked on bills that would make sure that people have access to affordable long-term care. So, and tax credits for caregiving, which did not pass. But we don't give up. Sometimes it takes us 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, sometimes 8 years, 9 years to pass bills. We also worked on a plethora of bills that deal with veterans and veterans income tax, a trust fund for veterans. We worked on a spouse bill for veterans to make sure that they don't have to pay property tax once the veteran dies. And so we have a whole plethora of bills that, you know, we'll have on our website that we are still finalizing. The governor just signed his last set of bills on Tuesday, and our volunteers were there to get their picture with the governor, the speaker, and the president of the Senate. That's one of the perks of coming to work with us in Annapolis. And again, let me give you that information. If you'd like to come work with us on legislation, either local, at the state level, we also have meetings with our congressional delegation. Please contact us at aarp.org/MD. And you can find all the information about our advocacy volunteers. And again, these folks sitting here with me today, they have worked so hard in the last 90 days. Before we established this very succinct team with all their expertise, there was no way that I could weigh in and have 30 bills that I could say that Maryland won on, or, you know, that we have got passed for Marylanders. And I think it was maybe, I was around maybe 5 or 6 bills that I could work on myself. And then we started with this advocacy team, and it's just grown and grown and grown. And you see, you know, Karen, who's got an expertise in some of the tax bills that we worked on. Karen Morgan, it was Karen Calla. Karen Morgan likes the, you know, the privacy bills and making sure that elders are protected. Priscilla works on our livable communities. Jim Gutman works on our prescription drugs. We also have a team that works on behavioral health. Lois Mazzaros is in the audience, and she worked and drafted testimony on funding, so that funding for the 988 bill, so that if you have a family member or you yourself have problems with behavioral health and you're trying to get help for either you or a loved one, there is a behavioral health hotline. It's called 988. And so now it's been funded. And so we're very pleased about that. But we work continuously, long days, long nights, long weekends. I know it can be a little bit much, but all these folks here with me have made AARP Maryland a success. So thank you for tuning in today. And if you'd like to join us and either virtually or here or in a hybrid kind of atmosphere, just go to aarp.org/MD. Thank you.